In the year of 1991, in the city of Madrid, Spain, a tragic and mysterious story began to unfold. Estefanía Gutiérrez Lázaro was a 16-year-old girl living a normal life with her family in the neighborhood of Vallecas. She had friends, dreams, and like many teenagers, she also had curiosity. A curiosity that would eventually lead her into something beyond comprehension. It all started during a rare lunar eclipse, an event often associated with mystery and change across cultures. On that night, Estefanía was with two close friends when they decided to play with a Ouija board. Their intention was not to contact spirits or delve into the supernatural. Rather, they wanted to reach out to the ex-boyfriend of one of them, who had recently died in a motorcycle accident. The session seemed harmless at first. The girls followed the usual ritual. Hands on the planchette, questions in the air, waiting for answers from the other side. At first, the responses were vague and random, but then the planchette began to move faster, as if it had gained a life of its own. One of them read aloud what appeared on the board. "I am here." That was the moment everything changed. According to later reports, a sudden coldness filled the room and the lights flickered without any explanation. Estefanía was the only one who reacted physically. She started sweating cold sweat, breathing heavily, and staring at the board as if she had seen something invisible. Her friends, frightened, interrupted the session immediately, left the room running, and promised never to repeat the experience again. But for Estefanía, that night didn't end there. In the hours following the session, strange behaviors began to appear. She started talking to herself, complaining of unexplained pains, and claiming to hear voices no one else could hear. Her parents, Carlos and Adriana, noticed the changes but initially believed it was just a psychological reaction to the scare of the previous night. However, in the days that followed, what seemed to be trauma gradually revealed itself as something far more disturbing. Estefanía began having frequent nightmares, waking up screaming in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat and visibly terrified. She complained of intense physical pain, especially in her back and chest, pain that came out of nowhere and resisted any medication. Carlos and Adriana tried to comfort her, holding her hands and speaking softly, but each attempt seemed to worsen the situation. Sometimes, Estefanía spoke as if someone else was inside her, answering questions in different voices than her own. At times, she even spoke in languages no one understood, something that had never been witnessed by those who lived with her daily. Family members began to hear strange sounds inside the house. Footsteps in the hallway at night, whispers coming from the walls, and even voices speaking words no one could interpret. One of the most unsettling aspects was that these voices seemed to know personal details about the family, things that Estefanía shouldn't have known, such as private conversations or events that happened behind closed doors. The behavioral changes in the teenager started affecting the rest of the household. Her younger siblings reported having bad dreams, waking up in the middle of the night scared, and avoiding entering Estefanía's room. Some said they felt sudden chills in certain parts of the house, even on warm days. Then came the physical phenomena. Doors that were never loose began slamming shut unexpectedly. Lights flickered randomly, even with the switches turned off. And objects simply disappeared, only to reappear in places where no one had placed them. Shoes on the couch, books inside the fridge, toys on top of tall shelves. One of the most shocking moments occurred when Estefanía, during one of these episodes, started barking like a dog. It was completely out of character. A smart, well-educated, and sensitive girl suddenly imitating animal sounds without any control. Her siblings ran out of the room, scared, while her parents stood frozen in shock. With all medical exams inconclusive and no physical or neurological issues detected, Carlos decided to take her to a doctor. He thought perhaps there was some neurological or psychiatric issue involved. They did complete blood tests, brain scans, but all results came back normal. Still, it was clear to anyone who interacted with Estefanía that something was very wrong, both physically and mentally. As no medical diagnosis helped, the family sought psychological help. Estefanía was taken to a therapist specialized in childhood trauma, hoping he could find some rational cause for the disturbances. But just like the doctors, the psychologist couldn't understand the case. Estefanía showed no specific mental disorder, but her reactions were too intense to be ignored. That's when Carlos decided to investigate other possibilities, paths he had never imagined walking before. He started researching the Ouija board, demonic possessions, and famous cases of supposed communication with the other side. He found reports of negative spirits, entities that approach vulnerable people and feed on their fear and anxiety. He learned that many people around the world reported similar experiences, especially when the Ouija board was used during eclipses or in emotionally charged environments. With all this information, Carlos began to believe that somehow, his daughter had indeed made contact with something beyond our physical world, and worse, that thing had no intention of leaving. As the months passed, the symptoms got worse. What started as hallucinations and strange voices evolved into violent convulsions, aggressive behavior, and even unexplained physical changes. Estefanía's parents desperately needed help, so they finally contacted the police, not only because of their daughter's death, but also due to the continued strange occurrences in the house. When the officers arrived, it was already possible to notice that this wouldn't be a normal investigation. The family reported hearing noises during the night, objects moving on their own, and even sensations of presence within the house. The inspector in charge of the case was José Pedro Negri, a professional known for his rational approach to unusual situations. Upon entering the house, the team noticed an eerie atmosphere, as if there was a negative energy lingering in the air. One officer even said he felt an intense cold as soon as he crossed the threshold, despite the weather being mild that day. During the inspection, the agents noted the chaotic state of the apartment, especially Estefanía's bedroom. The walls were marked with deep scratches, some resembling claw marks. Posters and photos had been torn or distorted inexplicably. Many of the doors were found locked from the inside, even those that didn't have internal locks, a detail that puzzled the investigators. At one point, while the officers were talking with the parents in the living room, one of the closet doors in the hallway suddenly opened without anyone near it. According to Inspector Negri himself, it was an abnormal, sudden opening with no physical explanation. Another disturbing detail recorded was the presence of a brown stain on a table in the living room. At first glance, it looked like spilled coffee or accumulated dirt. However, upon closer examination, the agents realized it had viscous characteristics, resembling saliva or mucus. This detail was included in the official police report, causing great impact among the authorities involved. Some of the officers said that this was the first time in their careers they had seen something so strange at a crime scene. Additionally, the officers reported feeling strong pressure on their chests when entering Estefanía's room. Some claimed to have heard murmurs coming from the walls, while others felt an invisible force lightly pushing them when walking alone through the room. Despite all the technical rigor used in the investigation, no logical conclusion could explain what really happened to Estefanías. What remained was a disturbing document filled with descriptions that went beyond human understanding, and that still intrigues experts, researchers, and curious people around the world today. After Estefanía's tragic and inexplicable death, many would have expected the strange phenomena inside the house to finally stop. But to the surprise and terror of the family, the opposite happened. The supernatural manifestations became even more intense. Carlos and Adriana tried to maintain a sense of normalcy for the sake of their other children, but it was impossible to ignore that something had changed radically within the apartment. The voices Estefanía used to hear while alive continued to be heard by the rest of the family. Only now they were louder, more frequent, and at times seemed angry or frustrated. One of the most disturbing aspects was the constant feeling of being watched. Both Carlos and Adriana said they could feel eyes fixed on them even when they were alone in closed rooms. This sensation repeated itself several times a day, causing great emotional tension. The sounds also increased. Heavy footsteps were heard walking through the hallway at night, even when no one was awake. At times, they came from Estefanía's room. Other times, from places where there were no furniture or objects capable of making noise. On some occasions, the screams were so loud that neighbors complained, thinking there was a violent fight happening inside the house. When the parents went to check, they found nothing, just absolute silence and an unusual sense of emptiness. One of the most shocking events occurred about 2 weeks after Estefania's death. Carlos was watching TV in the living room when he clearly saw a shadow cross the side corridor of the house. It was tall, thin, and moved awkwardly, as if it didn't have full control over its body. He ran to the spot, but found nothing. Still, his heart was racing, and he knew that what he had seen was not a product of imagination. The experience was so real that he had difficulty sleeping in the following nights. Adriana, in turn, reported being gently pushed while walking through the kitchen. She was alone in the house at the time, and there was no wind or any other physical explanation for what happened. She said she felt an invisible force, as if someone had passed by her and accidentally touched her. As time passed, the younger children began to show symptoms similar to Estefania's before her death. They had constant nightmares, woke up crying during the night, and avoided entering their sister's room. One of the boys even said that someone entered his room every night and whispered words into his ear. When asked what was said, he replied, "That I will see you again," a phrase that left everyone in shock, especially because it was something Estefania used to say when speaking to her loved ones. In addition, objects started disappearing mysteriously. Clothes vanished from the laundry room and reappeared hanging neatly in Estefania's closet. Books fell from shelves on their own, and family photos turned upside down without any apparent reason. The scratches on the walls of Estefania's bedroom also worsened. Although they had been cleaned and repaired after her death, similar marks began to reappear days later, as if something was trying to reaffirm its presence there. Faced with all this, Carlos and Adriana decided to speak again with Inspector Jose Pedro Negri, asking for help in understanding what was happening. They brought detailed reports of all the events and showed home videos capturing some of the anomalies. Although the inspector listened carefully, he said that officially the case was already closed. There was no criminal evidence, no law violation, and no proof that anything physical was involved. However, he admitted off-record that this would be one of the strangest cases of his career, and that he himself had doubts about what had really happened in that house. With the paranormal events intensifying further, Carlos and Adriana realized they could not continue living in that house. Each corner of the apartment seemed to carry a painful memory, and the feeling of being observed by something invisible became unbearable. Their younger children began suffering from constant anxiety attacks. One boy started fearing to sleep alone, while the youngest girl cried every night before falling asleep, saying she saw shadows on the ceiling. Despite their love for the house where they had raised their children, the parents understood that their priority now was protecting their family's mental and physical health. Therefore, they made an extreme but necessary decision to move out as soon as possible. They began looking for a new home still within Madrid, but away from the neighborhood of Vallecas. They did not want to simply trade one haunted house for another nearby. They needed to get completely away from that environment to regain peace. They found a modest apartment in another neighborhood, more peaceful and distant from the old residence. It was smaller, had fewer rooms, and wasn't as comfortable as the previous one, but it seemed safe, and that was all that mattered at the moment. However, the move was not easy. Every time they tried to pack belongings or enter Estefania's room to collect her things, they felt a strange resistance. It was as if something did not want them to leave. On several occasions, doors suddenly shut when they were open. The lights turned off on their own exactly when someone entered the hallway. And at times, they heard low voices coming from empty spaces, as if someone was trying to prevent them from leaving. Carlos decided to do a final spiritual cleansing before leaving the apartment. He called Father Tomas again, who performed a short blessing ceremony and prayers for protection. He also asked permission to take some of Estefania's personal items with him, as a way of continuing the farewell process. During this ceremony, something unexpected happened. One of the candles burned abnormally. Instead of melting normally, the wick began releasing small intermittent blue flames, something rare and often associated with spiritual manifestations according to ancient religious traditions. Afterward, the priest told Carlos and Adriana that, regardless of what had been present in the house, he believed it was no longer there. According to him, it may have been released with Estefania's death, or perhaps it had chosen to follow the family. The official move took place in mid-October 1992, about a year after Estefania's death. It was an emotionally heavy day. Everyone cried when leaving the apartment, including Carlos, who had always been the most rational in the house. As he closed the door for the last time, Adriana said out loud that she was grateful for everything they had learned there, and that she hoped her daughter's soul had finally found peace. At that moment, a strong gust of wind blew through the hallway of the building, even though no windows were open. As soon as they arrived at the new apartment, they noticed an immediate change. The air was different, lighter. The children seemed more relaxed, and even the family pets, who had been agitated in recent weeks, showed clear signs of calmness. In the following days, the paranormal events ceased completely. No screams during the night, no shadows appearing in the corners of their eyes, and not even the strange sounds that had terrified them. It seemed that, finally, peace had returned to the family's life. Even so, Carlos and Adriana knew they could never forget what they had lived through. That experience had marked them deeply, changed the way they viewed the world, and reinforced their belief that there are forces beyond our understanding. Forces that, sometimes, can be invoked without us even knowing what we are calling upon. Estefania's story did not end with her death. In fact, it spread far beyond Spain. As news of the case reached researchers, journalists, and paranormal investigators around the world, it sparked a wave of interest in the effects of Ouija board usage and the possibility of accidental summoning. Many experts in parapsychology and spiritual phenomena studied the case in depth, comparing it to other historical incidents involving unexplained deaths, possession claims, and communication attempts with the dead. Some scientists argued that Estefania might have suffered from a rare psychological condition, possibly triggered by suggestion and stress. Others, particularly theologians and spiritual advisors, believed she had genuinely made contact with a negative entity, something that had latched onto her energy and followed her until the end. Regardless of interpretation, the case served as a warning. It highlighted how easily young people, especially those going through emotional transitions, can become susceptible to experiences that seem harmless at first but can spiral into trauma or worse. It also emphasized the importance of parental guidance when it comes to practices like the Ouija board. While many view it as just a game, history has shown that under certain conditions, emotional vulnerability, lack of preparation, or even specific atmospheric circumstances, these sessions can lead to unexpected consequences. Over time, Estefania's name became part of the global conversation on paranormal research. Her story was cited in academic papers, spiritual seminars, and even referenced in television programs exploring the boundaries between science, faith, and the unknown. Today, decades later, the case of Estefanía Gutiérrez Lázaro remains one of the most debated and mysterious in the field of paranormal investigation. Whether interpreted as a tragic psychological breakdown or a rare case of supernatural interference, it continues to serve as a cautionary tale. If there is one lesson to be taken from this story, it is this: curiosity is natural, but it must be guided by awareness. Not all games are harmless. Not all questions should be asked. And not all doors, once opened, can be closed again. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to this story. May it remind you to approach the unknown with respect, caution, and above all, understanding.